Blog Talk Radio.
Let everyone know that the regulars march for Lexington and Concord. The British are coming!
Why is no one anywhere in the world telling you the truth and telling you to prepare? I will tell you that I had a network, one of the big three, a network official actually tell me in the last 2 years, Glenn, we all know what's coming. And this is a quote, but we have a responsibility not to tell the American people because they'll freak out.
If I could have gotten 51 votes in the Senate of the United States for an outright ban, picking up every one of them, Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in, I would have done it.
No one will be able to be armed. We will take all weapons.
I chose my friends carefully. The more politically active black students, the foreign students, the Chicanos, the Marxist professors.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
But I also believe a lot of gun owners would agree that AK-47s belong in the hands of soldiers, not in the hands of criminals.
I asked, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. They estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers.
That was the voice of Larry Grathwohl, former undercover operative, describing the Weather Underground's plans at a national meeting in 1969. Bill Ayers, President Obama's future mentor and ghost autobiographer, attended those discussions as a leader of the Weathermen. Ayers' associates built and detonated murderous terror bombs. Ayers is a self-described lifelong communist revolutionary. Barack Obama began his political life in Bill Ayers' living room. In 1969, Ayers and the Weathermen already planned to exterminate President Obama's so-called bitter clingers, religious gun owners who would resist his vision of social progress. They have been working on this for generations, but they still have one thorny problem to overcome. The Americans are not yet disarmed and helpless.
At the beginning, Hitler didn't look like or talk like a monster at all. He talked like an American politician.
Stalin took the guns. Mao took the guns. Fidel Castro took the guns. Hugo Chavez took the guns. And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms. Doesn't matter how many lemmings you get out there on the street begging for them to have their guns taken. We will not relinquish them. Do you understand?
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its maximum hour of danger. You are that generation. This is your role. Freedom must be defended from the government that wants to take it away from us.
The Robert Rule Show starts in
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Robert Rule Show. I'm your host, Robert Rule. Today is August 20th, 2014. It's funny, this is why I don't put titles in my show. I understand that you get more listenership, you get more viewers the next day to the podcast. But the reason I don't do it is because we come under attack. We're under attack right now. So that's the reason I don't do that. And I understand a lot of people, they're just going to browse through and look it over. That's fine. I'm not looking for a lot of publicity. I just want to get the word out. I'm not looking to make money. If I was looking to make money, I'd have all kinds of commercials on right now. I've got people actually offering to sponsor the show. I don't want to do that. All right. So I want to talk about a couple things this evening. We're going to go into the unions, why unions are bad, why unions are good, different types of unions, the history of unions, and then I want to talk about Agenda 21. I have a very, very powerful interview that was conducted today, as a matter of fact. And you're going to absolutely love it. It deals with Agenda 21, the whole plan. It's been going on since the 1950s. And but some parts of it has been going on long before that, with the introduction of the IRS and the Federal Reserve in 1913. So, let's get into your headlines first. I got Macko waiting in the wings, and I kind of fly by the seat of my pants, ladies and gentlemen. I don't have a program director. I do what feels good, and we're going to see where this takes off. But ladies and gentlemen, as always, you know what? Actually, I'm going to bring Mr. Macko on, congressional candidate for the 14th District, Libertarian Party. I'm going to bring him on and do the headlines with him, and then we're going to get into everything else. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dave Macko. Dave, how you doing tonight?
I have some very good news.
All right, let us have it.
On Monday, October 13th, I will be debating my Democrat and Republican opponents at the City Club of Cleveland, just as I did in 2008 and just as I did not do in 2012. The City Club of Cleveland is again the citadel of free speech. Also, Bob Bridges, the Libertarian candidate for Auditor of State, will be debating on Monday, September 15th. Our state chairman, Kevin Nedler, who's running for Secretary of State, will be debating also, but the date has not yet been determined. And finally, if Charlie Earl, our candidate for governor, and Steve Lineberry, our candidate for Attorney General, manage to win in court and be on the ballot, I have been advised by sources within the City Club of Cleveland that they too will be invited to the debate. So the City Club is back on track as the citadel of free speech, and I'm looking forward to these events.
Now, I know Lineberry personally. I think he would be a great candidate to have on the ballot.
Certainly would. I've known him for over 25 years. He's a dedicated libertarian and patriotic American.
Right, and I would put patriotic American first. Party makes no difference when it comes to patriots. But
well, they're synonymous: dedicated libertarian and patriotic American.
All right, I'm going to get into the headlines, Dave, and feel free to chime in. I'm going to kind of, when you hear me pause, go ahead and chime in.
Okay.
So I'm going to read the headlines here. Is ISIS a renamed Al-Qaeda? There it is. That's the headline. That's up on Drudge Report. And what did I say not too long ago, Dave? I don't know if you were listening, but I said it's the artist formerly known as.
I missed that, but Alex Jones also mentioned that on his show several weeks ago. And, of course, to remind new listeners or people who haven't quite been observing as carefully as they should, Al-Qaeda should really be called Al-Qaeda because it was created by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency during the Afghan War. And allegedly we lost control of it, or maybe we were going to do it that way all along. Who knows for sure?
Yeah, Al-Qaeda is famously known for beheading Americans, and that's exactly what this ISIS is doing. So it's just Al-Qaeda, just under a different name. They're probably still run by us. We certainly gave them the ammunition and weapons in Syria. Americans brace for new wave of terror. Now, what's interesting is I recorded something, and I wanted to play it tonight, but it doesn't quite fit in with everything. I think I'm going to save that until next Sunday. But there is a farmer who owns a big piece of land down in Texas, and he has pictures of Middle Eastern men coming over from these countries that we're at war with. And this administration just let these guys walk through the back door. And people and American citizens are cheering it on, saying, oh, yeah, we want illegals here. We want illegals here. Why shouldn't they be here? Well, if they're going to blow up your house, what do you think of that?
This shows how fraudulent the whole war on terror is. If there really was a war on terror and we really were under attack, any decent government would be strengthening our borders and keeping out people who could do us harm. Also, if there really were a threat of terror and the government was really interested in protecting the American people, it would urge everyone to be better armed. So that if you did catch someone on the street doing something odd, you could take care of the situation before 10 or 100 or 1,000 people died. And of course, we should bring all of our troops home from abroad. If we're under attack, they should be here.
And here's an interesting headline. Al-Qaeda announces solidarity with ISIS. Oh, man, you can't make this stuff up. Come on now. Obama rushes to the golf course after giving a statement on the beheading.
I hate to be put in this position. It's a really horrible, aggravating position to be put into, but maybe we're better off with Obama on the golf course than Obama in the White House directly.
I think I'd have to agree there.
Thank you. And as to Al-Qaeda in solidarity with ISIS, if you were a Siamese twin, you'd be pretty much in solidarity with yourself, too.
Here's one. See, CFR boss calls for military action against ISIS. So we know all about the CFR. Maybe you could give us a brief history on the CFR.
After Woodrow Wilson lied us and sucked us into World War I, he tried to set up the one world government, the League of Nations. But the United States Senate at that time, shockingly enough to young people who haven't studied history much, was actually loyal to the United States, and so the United States remained outside the League of Nations. In England, there was a one-worlder group called the Royal Institute for International Affairs, I think it is, and they set up a subsidiary, which was the Council on Foreign Relations. People like John Foster Dulles, Walter Lippmann, other traders who were one-worlders and wanted to merge us into the one-world government, organized this just after World War I, and I believe it was in 1921. I don't have all my documentation with me right now, so I'm working from my best source of documentation, which is my brain. And by the time of the Roosevelt regime, these people had heavily infiltrated themselves into the State Department. And since then, we've had enemies of the United States running our government and the State Department and working for a one-world government. So that's basically what the CFR is. Your top politicians, your top establishment news people, your top businessmen in many cases. I don't have the current list handy, but I think now anyone could go to the Internet and look up Council on Foreign Relations and they'd see the current membership list. And they should be very surprised by the leaders they see on it.
And there was a book written on that, was it? A journalist was allowed to go in and actually look at the files. Do you remember his name?
No, but Dan Smoot wrote one late in the 1960s, And there was an admiral who was a member for 16 years or so, and he and Phyllis Schlafly wrote one. And again, if you had told me we were going to be talking about the CFR, I'd have all this information. But yeah, there have been several exposés. They're basically one-worlders. They want to destroy our economy so that we can be comfortably merged into a one-world government.
And do you want to go on record right now and say that, A, you're not a member of the CFR, and B, you would never take advice from the CFR?
I am not a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I have never been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, nor would I take any advice from any member of the Council on Foreign Relations or anyone who does not uphold the Constitution of the United States and the basic principles of liberty. To be honest, but I don't take too much advice from anybody.
That's good advice.
Thank you.
Rick Perry, which we all know this was going to happen, is set to capitalize on his arrest. He already has.
Well, that's the Democrats' fault. They shouldn't have made those trumped-up charges. Every governor of in the United States and the president of the United States has the authority to veto laws. And it's only overridden by a two-thirds majority. This woman trying to get rid of was the district attorney. She's a drunken, crazy Democrat maniac. It's perfectly proper of him to try to get her out of office by defunding the office.
Here's my...
the Democrats are amazing. They have amazing gall. Now, Perry's right on this one. You can argue with Perry about many of his programs because they are anti-libertarian, anti-American. Some of them are, but he's totally in the right here. Alex Jones again did an excellent job defending him, even though, as Alex said, there's a lot of things about him he doesn't like either.
Right. I mean, Perry has done a lot of bad things in the past. And as most politicians do, they know, and even Rick Santorum admitted before that he went along to get along. So, but here's what I see. I saw in the, the 2008 elections, I saw Rick Perry in the primary learning a lot from Ron Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he has taken that to the next level. And in all honesty, I think he is sincere here in this, and I think he's turning over a new leaf. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Well, he must be doing something right, or the Democrats wouldn't have attacked him so viciously and underhandedly.
Right. Because
unless
they eat their own.
Unless you think they're working together to actually help Perry. And this will actually help Perry. The way he's being attacked makes any decent person who's observing the situation come out on his side on this issue, at least.
Absolutely. There were people at the courthouse cheering for Rick Perry. So I think he's going to be a viable candidate in 2016 if he keeps it up. Refrigeration. Farmers predicts super cold winter, and I believe there was a scientist who maps weather patterns by the sun and the moon who also predicted that this winter would be very cold. He doesn't map weather the way the global warming alarmists do.
Well, the last 90-degree weather in Cleveland was at the end of June. There's only been 3 90-degree days all summer. I don't mind. I like it. But if the trend continues till winter, it's going to be a very cold winter.
Yeah, and I got to work outside in that.
I'm sorry about that. Good to be retired.
You know, it wasn't too bad working in 45 below. I think I can do it again.
All right, stay warm.
All right. Godfather losing a grip in Chicago. People are waking up, huh?
Now, there's a particularly disgusting example of Democrat corruption.
Chicago's really gone downhill since he's taken charge.
It's the murder capital of the United States and possibly, well, if Iraq wasn't there, probably the world.
All right, I'm going to go through a couple headlines, and then I'm going to get into things. Holder says change is coming. And let's see what Holder meant by that. St. Louis Attorney General Eric Holder sought Wednesday to reassure the people of Ferguson about the investigation into Michael Brown's death and said he understands why many black Americans do not trust police. Well, hey, count me in, Mr. Holder. Recalling how he was repeatedly stopped by officers who seemed to target him because of his race. Well, you're not the only one. Holder made the remarks during a visit to St. Louis suburb that he has endured more than a week of unrest fueled by a fatal shooting of a black 18-year-old by a white officer. Now, what have you heard in this case so far, and what are your thoughts?
The police in Ferguson were either very stupid or they were ordered to do things that would make them look bad. They should have released all the information right at the beginning. Also, they should not have targeted newsmen. Not only honest newsmen like Alex Jones's InfoWars news team, they were going and attacking leftist establishment media, such as the Huffington Post. And so they went into a McDonald's restaurant at one time to throw these people out.
Well, what do you think?
I consider Holder in the same class as Al Sharpton as meddlers. He should not be meddling and trying to prejudge that situation.
Right, but what have you heard as far as the shooting itself?
What have I heard regarding
the shooting itself?
Oh, it appears to be, and again, the police would have done better to release all the information at the beginning. It appears that the black youth, as they like to call them, was advancing on the police officer, and the victim, if we want to call him, we'll call him victim for the time being, is over 300. Weighed 300 pounds. He was a grown man, even though he wasn't at the age of 18. He apparently had robbed that store and roughed up the manager, the little guy who was shoved to the floor. And he was walking down the middle of the street. Now, I also, besides Alex Jones, I like to listen to a pastor named James David Manning, a black pastor from New York City. And
Long-legged
Pastor Manning
Mac
strongly implied that that the so-called victim must have been on drugs of some sort to behave in that very, very odd way. Now, this is not to let the police off. They shouldn't have all of these military weapons to use against the American people. This should stop. If I were in Congress, I would auction off the surplus weapons to any American or lawful guest who wanted to have them, as long as there weren't any technical secrets involved in any of the weapons. Then we would be on the road to being a free country again.
Well, the thing that we're hearing in the news, and here's an example. When I went off on the reporter from the News Herald the other day, he didn't have his facts straight. And most media is pretty much the same way. They don't have their facts straight. And so we don't really know what happened. But what we're hearing is, and that's why I don't like to comment on a lot of things if I don't know exactly what's going on.
True.
So I don't want to speculate. I don't want to blame one person or the other. But I did hear that the officer was in a struggle with the young man who clearly outweighed him. And something happened to his eye socket, and I forget what they call that. But he feared for his life. And in that case, you can shoot.
Of course.
That young man should have, if this is the case, okay, this is what I'm saying. If this is the case, then that young man should have never put his hands on that officer. Regardless of if the officer is in the wrong or not, you should not put your hands on a police officer. That stuff, even though it's a violation of your rights, it should be sorted out in court. If that officer violates your rights, you're looking at a pretty good payday. Wouldn't you say, Dave?
I agree with you. Yeah, in a situation with the cop, unless you're defending your own life, you should let it be settled in any court of law. We're in total agreement.
And so with that being said, there's no reason for a suspect to ever be shot if they are compliant.
Well, there have been instances of some cops who went crazy, but so far at least that's relatively rare, or
right.
It is rare.
But I want to play for you a clip out of Ferguson, and this particular clip was shot by a media crew, and some people say this media crew was egging the cop on, and they had what you call you remember that the police spokesman said unless you have a $50,000 camera, you're not considered media. Well, these guys did have a $50,000 camera. You can see it in the video. Here's the clip. Let me see if I can find it here. Now I have to warn you. This has a lot of profanity in it, but it's only about a minute long. So if you don't like profanity, you might want to turn down the volume and join us in a minute. Here's a clip.
Oh my God, gun range. Gun pointed.
My hands are up, bro. My hands are up.
Hands up. Gun raised and pointed. Raised and pointed at civilians. Hands up. I will fucking kill you. Get back. Hands up. Get back.
You're gonna kill him.
He's trying to kill me.
Okay, what you're hearing here is the officer say, "I'm going to effing kill you," while pointing a semi-automatic weapon at the news crew. Now you play it one more time here.
Don't throw me! Don't throw anything! Oh my God, gun range. Gun
pointed.
Pointed.
My hands are up, bro. My hands are up.
Hands up. Gun raised and pointed. Raised and pointed at civilians. Hands up. I will fucking kill you. Get back. Hands up. Get back.
You're gonna kill him.
He's trying to kill me. He's trying to
Get back. What's your name, sir? Your name's Go Fuck Yourself? All right, go fuck yourself.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, officer, go fuck yourself.
Officer, go fuck yourself. He's trying to kill me.
I hope you guys are watching. He had to be told by another officer to point his gun.
All right, there it is. So now it's the law in many states that the officer has to identify himself. In this case, he said, "Go F yourself." Dave, what do you think of this behavior?
Either that policeman was almost nuts or he's trying to provoke a problem. This way the police have treated the establishment news media and the alternate or true media has been very, very bad for them. That's one of the worst aspects of this whole affair, other than the fact that the police are militarized to the point they look like stormtroopers from Star Wars. So that even if they are in the right, they've created a image or a situation where they really look guilty.
All right, we're going to go to this clip, Dave. I wanted to play this first, but I want to have you on at least for a little bit. If you have to go, we certainly understand. But this is about a 40-minute clip, and this is the interview between David Knight and Art Thompson of the John Birch Society. We often play the clip from, 1958? The predictions by the John Birch Society of what would happen. And I think we lost Dave. Like I say, we're under attack, so they don't like us talking about this stuff. They don't like us talking about unions. They don't like us talking about Agenda 21 and the New World Order. They just don't like it. And because we're bringing facts. And the facts pretty much speak for themselves. Here's the interview. Maybe we'll get Dave back on. We might even hear from Kim Laurie tonight. I'm not certain, but she is definitely an opponent of Agenda 21. So, here's the clip, and we'll see you in 40.
We're going to be joined in the next segment by the CEO of the John Birch Society, Arthur Thompson. We're going to be talking about his new book, International Merger by Foreign Entanglements. Yes, NAFTA has consequences. And even as we see those consequences being played out in our country, even as General Petraeus says that North America is what comes after America, they are moving to the next level. They're trying to join the North American Union, which is what they see now. No longer seeing America, Mexico, Canada. They see the North American Union. They're trying to join that with the European Union, with the Transatlantic Partnership, with the Asian Trade Group, so the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Very troubling implications of that. And, of course, it's being sold to us as free trade. It's going to be a very interesting discussion with the CEO of the John Birch Society. Before we get to that, I wanted to play for you a little bit of the founder of the John Birch Society, Robert Welch. We have a short clip here to give you a feel for, if you've never heard this man, to give you a feel for what he said quite a few years ago. Let's go to that clip now.
Of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example. Here are the aims for the United States. 1, greatly expanded government spending for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible. 2, higher and then much higher taxes. 3, an increasingly unbalanced budget despite the higher taxes.
This is 1958 that he's saying
wild inflation of our currency. 5, government controls of prices, wages, and materials, supposedly to combat inflation. 6, greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives. This is to be accompanied, naturally and automatically, by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government. 7, far more centralization of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. There is a many-faceted drive at work to have our state lines eventually mean no more within the nation than our county lines do now within the states. 8, the steady advance of federal aid to and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education. 9, a constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare. the beauties and the absolute necessity of peace. Peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government, which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself.
That's a speech by Robert Welch decades ago. And notice one of the things he said there kind of struck me. He said state lines would become meaningless. Well, you know what? International lines have become meaningless in the wake of NAFTA. Just as we had Nancy Pelosi go to the border and say, we have one community, we just happen to have a border running through it. And, of course, that border is just as meaningless as the border running between Texas and Oklahoma, as far as Nancy Pelosi is concerned. So that's what we're looking at here. We're going to be talking to Arthur Thompson about the implications and the methods of how they're doing this. They're basically setting up these regional trading zones, and then now they're at the stage where they are joining these together. Very troubling what they're doing, pushing through things that they could not get through, like CISPA, SOPA, ACTA, PIPA. They're pushing through that through the trade agreements as they merge the different states together. So join us right after the break. We're going to be back with Arthur Thompson from the John Birch Society. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we have joining us live here in studio the CEO of the John Birch Society, Arthur Thompson. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. You're here in the area because you've got a meeting tomorrow night that
tomorrow noon at Christie's Restaurant.
Tomorrow, okay.
Houston, yeah.
Yes, and that's what's the real price of free trade is the subject there, right?
Yes, it is, yeah.
And you'll be talking about your new book, which is International Merger by Foreign Entanglement. Boy, you got a copy of it right there, and we can see that? Yes. That's exactly what's going on, isn't it? We've had this amazing clip, and we'll play that in a second. But, yeah, tell us exactly what's happening now. As people are seeing the effects of NAFTA, it's another level that they're already working on as we see what's happening with
Well, that's right. They work at many levels. They do a number of different things. They have an agenda. Each agenda has, it's like a mosaic, if you will, and there's a tile in that mosaic. This is one of those tiles, but a very important one that fits their agenda. And basically, they are trying to merge the United States into a new world order, as we all know. Mm-hmm. But they do it through various means. For instance, they used NAFTA to be the platform, if you will, for a North American Union. Now they want to use the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership to do the same thing, only to merge us with the European Union. I actually was there when the wall came down in Berlin.
Wow.
And I was over there doing a research on what was going to happen next. One of the guys that I met with was the public relations officer in Bonn, Germany, for the EC. That was the European Community, just before they named it the EU. He looked me in the eye, and we were as close as this in his office in Bonn, and he said, we're going to be bigger than you geographically, population, and economically, and we're going to drag you into this union whether you like it or not, kicking and screaming.
Wow.
And I sat there and I said, well, wait a minute, I'm here representing the New American Magazine. Certainly the Washington Post has been here, the New York Times. Why aren't they reporting on this? He must be saying the same thing to them. And he was doing so very arrogantly. This to him was a done deal. It was not if, but when. Oh, yeah. And so that's their plan.
A lot of people are very concerned about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, about the transatlantic partnerships. Mm-hmm. Mainly because of the way they're being negotiated. I think a lot of people are looking at this and saying, why do we have our elected representatives not even allowed to read the transcripts unless they sign a non-disclosure? They can't take it with them. They can go there with their staff. A couple of them have been graciously allowed to see this, but it is completely shut off from the elected representatives. And you have to look at this and you have to say, what are they afraid of us seeing in this? And, of course, some of it has leaked out, and we know that it is not just about economic issues. It's about fundamental freedom issues like control of the Internet. They've tried many times to ram these things through, been defeated in the democratic process, trying to get CISPA, SOPA, ACTA, PIPA through both in the United States and in Europe. And so now they're going to do it in the back door with a trade agreement, amongst other things.
Amongst other things, even the Bill of Rights.
Yes.
I'll show you an example of that in a moment. But that's what they do. You know, it's sort of the philosophy of we got to pass it to find out what's in it.
Yes, exactly.
But
Very
there
dangerous
are people who do know outside of the main negotiating teams, and that's what they call shareholders.
Yes.
And these are the international bankers and the multinational corporations. And so they get their sweetheart deals so they can compete in this market. But the little guy and the medium-sized businessman cannot, and they're shoved out. So what you see is more smaller and medium-sized businesses going out of business, and banks as well. The smaller banks, the privately owned banks, that sort of thing.
Hundreds of banks were failing in the years after the bailout of the largest banks. Drudge was putting it up, another 140, another 170 failed this year.
Mm-hmm.
Driving out all their competition while they get massive subsidies from the government that they can then they eventually said, well, we paid it all back. Of course, I got a 0% interest loan to pay it back. It's not too hard to do that.
They're even talking about a negative interest rate now in some instances.
Absolutely amazing. Now, as we said, some of the things that they're trying to run through with this, and of course, as they come against the smaller businesses who don't have any protection, they're allowing the largest corporations to essentially be elevated to the level of sovereign governments in a kind of, whenever they have a trade dispute. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, the thing is that what they do in these instances is to make it so that only one entity can compete or actually function in these areas. And we have a number of people that manage these things that are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, but also people that are deprived of real good education relative to what freedom means, what free enterprise is, and everything else. So they're very happy with these things. They're going to have a cushy job. They're going to make more money than the next guy, and they don't have any comprehension of what they're doing to their own country and ultimately their own family. These people, by the way, if they form, and I don't think they'll be able to do it, I think we can stop them, but if they form a new world order, these are the people that will be eliminated from the system first.
Yes, yes.
Because what they do is they're giving power to these companies to function. But see, what they don't understand is that the power is really in the government. Now, yes, they allow these companies to go forward and do what they're doing, but the power really is in the government itself. Ultimately, when they only have one company doing this and one company doing that, they'll just come in and nationalize them and take it over. Let me give an example of something that I like to use when it comes to power. A lot of people think it's money. It's nothing to do with money. Hitler, Stalin, Mao, none of these people were rich. They were poor off the streets. When they got that power, they didn't want for anything. Let's take an example of today. Let's say that David Rockefeller walked into the studio and told you to cut my throat. You wouldn't do it. You'd get on 911 and say, there's a nutcase here. Come and get him.
He's probably on SSRIs.
Yeah. But he's got a lot of retainers, so obviously he wouldn't be at the county jail very long. But that kind of money that he has doesn't give him enough power to tell you what to do because you're a moral man. Now, if we were in 1950 in Beijing, China, and Mao Zedong walked in here and told you to cut my throat, you knew you had two choices, yours or mine. That's power. Money can't buy that power in a moral people. And that's what's being built, is this kind of power. It looks like money in the beginning, but it really isn't. It's an accumulation in the government itself.
This is something that's been going on a long time, and of course we played this clip, and I want to go to that clip. You guys got that ready from Petraeus and Pelosi? This is something we played many times, and I think this really lays it out. Here we are, 20 years in the North American Union, and let's play that clip, what Nancy Pelosi and David Petraeus have just said recently.
Anyone who comes here sees that this is a community with a border going through it.
Boldly proclaimed the coming North American decades as the title now. It's founded on recognition that if you put these three economies together, as has been the case 20 years into the North American Free Trade Act implementation, you find unique countries in terms of demographics.
We're all Americans in this hemisphere, North and South America, and this crisis that some call a crisis, we have to view as an opportunity.
There you go. The crisis is always an opportunity. But what David Petraeus was talking about, he answered his own question. what comes after America? He says North America. Well, what comes after North America is, as you pointed out, the globalist union, and that's why it's so important for us to get people educated about what is happening with the Trans-Pacific Partnership as well as the Transatlantic Partnership. They're now consolidating these regional economies together into a global regime, aren't they?
We are being integrated in our economy, and if people really go online and look for this economic integration situation, you will find that, for instance, a few years ago, George H.W. Bush signed an agreement with Putin saying that we are now partners in all sense of the term, that we are going to integrate our economies. And then Clinton followed it up with with the same sort of partnership agreement, and then George W. followed it up again to reaffirm this thing. If you go online and you start to look at Boeing and Lockheed, companies of that nature, let's see, another one's GE, you'll see that the integration of the process of manufacturing is very high. For instance, we cannot produce an airplane of any size in this country any longer without the Chinese and Russians supplying us the parts, particularly titanium parts. We see that Lockheed is working with them now on nuclear projects. They're working with the EU on and China on manned space projects. Now, I kind of worry a little bit about that when I see a potential enemy working with our own companies on things that will be a detriment to us in time of war. The secrets that they will learn, the very fact that we will not be able to manufacture the things that we need to manufacture to win a war.
Well, what you have with that is you have a corporation which has bits and pieces of everything that you need being made in these different countries. So not any one individual country has the power that, say, GE does, because they are the ones who can make this happen for anybody or stop it from happening for
That's true. The more disturbing aspect, however, it is that they're moving their R&D there, research and development there. General Motors has even said that. They're going to do all of their R&D now in China. Boeing does, Lockheed does, all these various firms are doing their R&D in Russia and China, or both.
I guess I look at this, too, and as we see the rise of robots, of artificial intelligence, as we see them taking over different aspects, it's not just that our manufacturing base has been put into China for the most part, but now we see that they're going to be competing even with people in service industries here. So the question is, what do we do when the robots are driving everybody everywhere, doing everyone's service for them? What do they need us for? And, of course, many of them have said they don't need us, and they have a plan for that as well. We got to go to a commercial break. We're going to be right back with Arthur Thompson, CEO of the John Birch Society, and his book, International Merger by Foreign Entanglement. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. Here in Austin, we have joining us live in the studio, Arthur Thompson, CEO of the John Birch Society. Just before we went to break, Mr. Thompson, you were talking about how the multinational corporations are essentially moving bits and pieces of critical industries amongst the different countries so that nothing is made entirely within one country. And we were talking during the break about Boeing. Tell the people about what's going on with that in our defense industry.
Well, Boeing is cooperating with the aircraft industry in China to help them manufacture parts that are competitive on the world market for military aircraft and that sort of thing. Particularly for the Chinese new fighter and the operation of the Chinese carrier. The Chinese have a carrier now, and so the aircraft that operate on that, the Boeing's working with them to upgrade those things. So that should help the feelings of the Filipinos and the Japanese and the Vietnamese, feel real good about that sort of thing. And don't think for a minute they don't know that's going on. And so they look at us, with at an askance look, if you will, because wait a minute, you're our friend here, but then you're helping our enemy there. Just like something else is going on right now, I think that the listeners really need to know about, and it's a little off subject, but something that's been worrying me, and I got it confirmed in the front page of the Wall Street Journal on Monday, and that is that in order to fight ISIS, we're helping another terrorist organization. You see, because the Kurdish Workers' Party and the Democrat Party in Kurdistan were started by Russia. They used the hammer and sickle on their flag for years. Lately, they've been trying to obfuscate as to what they really stand for. But now they're on the terrorist watch list, okay?
Oh, yeah.
So we're helping one terrorist group on the watch list to fight another terrorist group.
That's right.
And then
we're probably equipping both of these. Actually, we have been equipping and training both sides of these things for quite some time. And in Syria, they were killing and beheading Christians before they got together and gave themselves a new name and went across the border into Iraq.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's exactly the way this thing rolls out. Well, talking about these trade agreements, I mean, these things are really kind of Trojan horses for a whole slew of different issues.
Sure.
One of the things, of course, we were talking about was the UN Declaration of Human Rights getting put in, just as we were talking about putting in these controls of the Internet through the back door, calling them copyright violations. They can essentially put anything into these trade agreements. They're being negotiated in secret by corporate representatives, and our elected representatives are not allowed to even see this stuff.
That's right. You got to pass it in a week.
Yeah.
You don't have time to read it. One of the things I have here from the European Commission, for instance, is the Trade Policy Committee of how to handle the CETA agreement, the Canadian-European Trade Agreement. And right here, after a few pages, they say that they reaffirm their strong attachment to democracy and to fundamental rights as laid down in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So they slipped this thing into the treaty. And these are actually not the Bill of Rights as you and I and America believes in the Bill of Rights that come from God. These are rights given us by the United Nations.
Yeah.
And then they have stipulations about how they can take them away. You have freedom of speech as long as it isn't against the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Freedom of assembly as long as it's not against the purposes and principles of the United Nations.
So they're not really rights at all. They're really a list of privileges that they grant to you temporarily and can take away at any point that they want. That's not a fundamental right. If it doesn't come from God, if it's being given to you by some government somewhere, some political organization, then they can take those rights at any point under any pretense.
True, and in fact, in some of them, they have an exception, for instance, on the freedom of assembly that any dictator can run a car through. And so they just want to control the people, but they make people think that they've got rights. They make people think that they've got free elections and that sort of thing. We just had a study on elections under dictators. Most people don't know that they did have elections in Nazi Germany and under Stalin, and how they were manipulated to where the people thought that they had a free vote, but really did not. And we're starting to see that now creep into the voting system in the United States.
Yes, we've discussed many times with people who follow this very carefully. There's so many different ways that you can control an election. You can control who gets on the ballot. You can control who gets into the debates, as we've seen over and over again. And then, of course, whoever counts the votes, whoever registers the voters, whoever has custody of the votes, whoever reports this, I mean, you can get into that system in so many different ways. That's what's so troubling about it. And we can't even address voter ID without being called racist. We're going to get into some more of what's happening with the UN trying to impose local police controls on us, and some of the things that you were just telling me during the break. We'll be right back. We're talking to Arthur Thompson, CEO of the John Birch Society. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight here in Austin. I have joining me in the studio Arthur Thompson, CEO of the John Birch Society. And we were just talking about a new American article earlier in the program. We're talking about what's happening in Ferguson, Missouri, and how the people there are so compliant and to the federal government's involvement. And they think that the federal government coming in is going to solve it, even to the extent that it now opens up the door for the UN to get involved. And we've seen the Secretary General come out and start talking about setting up UN standards for local police.
In fact, I talk about it in my book. On page 68, it shows that a major out of the Baltimore Police Department attended a United Nations conference on UN standards for police, and they call it the United Nations Police Commanders Course. So what they're trying to do is not just nationalize the police, but internationalize.
Yes, yes. As it gets farther and farther away from us, it becomes harder and harder to get control of the situation. What we see happening, I think, so many different aspects of society, certainly we see it happening with the police, is that when you have someone who goes off of the mission statement or who is corrupt or who does something that you don't want to have that happen, there needs to be a method for getting control of that, for rooting out the corruption, for rooting out the bad behavior, and yet we see that that's not happening. We had a retired Marine Colonel, Pete Martino, come on the program. He first came to our attention when he spoke out about a very small town in New Hampshire being given a large Pentagon vehicle, a Bearcat in that particular case. It wasn't an MRAP. And he was saying they don't follow the mission statement, which ultimately is a constitution, but they each have their own individual mission statements. And if you don't have a means to purge this corruption, it just becomes systemic. And it seems to me like if you don't have any kind of local control or local control of these people, some way to pull that back locally, as it gets moved farther and farther away, it gets worse and worse, doesn't it?
Truly. And the thing is that the solution to it really is local involvement. Mm-hmm. You can't approach a policeman and say, "You dirty rat." It doesn't work. Right. So you try and become friends and educate as many policemen as you can. At the same time, educating local officials. These are police powers. These are not. Mm-hmm. You've got to follow the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. And so it takes an awful lot of education and goodwill to do that. Everything we see today is reactive. Mm-hmm. They're trying to get us to react. They're trying to get the people to react. They're trying to get the police to react. They put them through a lot of federal training, for instance, that imbues them with the idea of them and us. Yes. And these are our enemies. And you can understand a little bit if the liberal press is there, a conservative cop is against the liberal press, because usually the press attacks the police. That's been the history of it. Mm-hmm. They don't look at what really happens in a situation like this individual that was shot from the front. It looks like he was attacking, mm-hmm. but the liberal press rushes to the idea that he was shot in the back or whatever else they may say. So the police don't trust the media, and that causes a reaction mm-hmm. in the police and in the media as a result.
And we see that not only with the police, but I see it in our interaction with every government official. When we come to them and talk to them, it's like they're all acting as if they're the CIA now. You know, they've got this secret information that they don't want to share with me. There is no more transparency in government. Everything it seems like it's hidden. They don't want to be forthright and come out with it. I think if they had that information, they should have shared it much, much earlier. Now, when it comes out that all the shots are in the front, that the police officer has a major injury to his eye where he was struck, as things like that are coming out, if we don't get that out early, if they're not transparent about it, when it eventually comes out in a trial and the officer's found innocent, if that's what happens, the public's not going to believe it because they were so close-lipped about it. So in a way, it's almost as if they are trying to foment disruption.
That's true. And if you remember the 60s and 70s, we had a lot of so-called men of peace. Mm-hmm. But the peace, the way they implement it, was designed to provoke. Mm-hmm. And so you may have a peaceful demonstration, but it may not quite be peaceful. One of the things that we see in all of this is a reoccurrence of what happened in the 60s and 70s. As it becomes more reactive on both sides, you get more militarization. Mm-hmm. And they pass more laws. Mm-hmm. They always want more laws. But we get back to the point, too. By the way, the John Birch Society in my town stopped a riot before it got going. We knew it was planned. We knew what they had to do. They had to get people into the streets. Mm-hmm. We went door to door in the central area of the town and said, stay home. Make it a quiet weekend. They didn't have a riot while all the rest of the country was burning down. But it was no conspiracy. It just that it all happened at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
But we were able to do that by telling the people, look, don't let your kids out in the street this weekend. Just keep them home. Mm-hmm. And so that's the sort of thing is if people understand that you don't rally to the noise in the streets, you can't get them whipped up to do things that causes a reaction on the part of the police, which causes a reaction on the part of the crowd, which causes a further reaction, and it escalates out of control. Mm-hmm. And so we do know there are outside agitators coming in. That's always been the problem in our country in that regard. I can say this almost universally. There's no riot that occurs that isn't organized beforehand, even in the history of the United States. I'll tell you a little factoid that's going to be in my new book. Most people don't know that there was a riot in Philadelphia when it was the capital of the United States, searching for Washington to drag him out and hang him. It's true.
Really?
Foreign agents stirred it up. But that sort of thing is always planned. All these things like that, these public disturbances are very well planned. I've talked to an awful lot of ex-communists and others that have told me they were trained to do that kind of thing and how they were able to do it. They could take a little spark and blow it up out of control very easily, particularly if there was suspicion between them and us. So what we advocate is let's get friendly, let's talk to each other, let's get to know our neighbors, for instance. You know, in some communities, we don't even know the name of our next-door neighbor.
Well, and as we've seen in Ferguson, the people that are being arrested are increasingly from outside of the area, the people who are the troublemakers. I think what's concerning us, as we saw from the very beginning, we saw new rules of engagement where they were essentially on the very first day lighting up with sniper rifles, people from a great distance. You could see the red dots on their chest. So we have a different set of rule of engagement here, but this is something that has been ramping up for quite some time. Before we run out of time, I want to go back and talk a little bit about the history of the John Birch Society. One of the people that I always knew the best was Larry McDonald. I really admired him, and Ron Paul said that he was the most principled man in Congress, and that's quite a compliment coming from someone as principled as Ron Paul. We got a clip here where he went on CNN Crossfire just shortly before the plane that he was on was shot down or captured or whatever, and it was Tom Braden, who was somebody that was involved intimately with the creation of the CIA. He was in the OSS, and he also was involved with the Operation Mockingbird, which was, if people are not familiar with that, that was a means to get the press to be controlled by the CIA. This guy pulled all the stops out. If you listen to how many times he uses conspiracy, it's very interesting. This is Pat Buchanan, Tom Braden, and Larry McDonald. Here's a little clip of this, what you can see on YouTube.
This is the one group, I think, that those who would radically change America seriously fear. And a tremendous campaign was launched
Larry McDonald
in December of 1960 to move to discredit the John Birch Society, and frankly launched initial orders coming out of Macko.
Well, Mr. McDonald, I'm not a conspirator. I think even Buchanan would vouch for that.
Well, you are
Robert Wells. Robert Wells. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Is that a conspiracy?
Well, you've certainly. Well,
let me just tell you what Newsweek says this. The John Birch Society considers communism only one arm of a master conspiracy in which socialist American insiders are plotting to establish world government. Now, he also says, and here's Director John McManus, that's your public relations director, saying that former Secretary of State Alexander Haig and CIA Director William Casey are two of these master conspirators who are plotting to establish world government. Now, what do you say? That kind of silly, asinine statement is what makes people laugh. That's the John Birch Society.
Well, Tom, I'm sure being a long-standing member of the Rockefeller apparatus and as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations of long-standing, you're fully aware that there is an elitist core in this country that has seen value in subsidizing communism, of protecting communism.
It has?
Sure.
You're accusing me of subsidizing communism?
No, I'm saying
because I happen to belong to
there is an elite core
study group.
No, wait a minute. There is an elite core in this country that has dominated American society.
Well, I'm not one of them.
The Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations.
State Department, I suppose.
Well, let's face it, they've dominated the State Department for 40 years, and pretty much openly.
All right, but what are they trying to do?
Well, their objective is to try to bring about a gradual transition in our society, a dissolving of sovereignty, and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
Well, who are they?
The elitist groups that I mentioned, particularly key individuals and policymakers in the Council on Foreign Relations.
Is the International Monetary Fund part of this?
Well, I would say the International Monetary Fund.
You can see that entire clip on YouTube. It's about 15 minutes long, and Tom Braden was using that technique, which, of course, the term conspiracy theory came from the FBI in order to shut down anybody questioning the official story about the JFK assassination. They used that very effectively. At one point, Pat Buchanan said, you've used that term about 45 times now. And then he used it a couple more, and he goes, well, that's 47. So that was basically the tactic of Tom Braden, again, a man who was intimately involved with the CIA. I just loved how Larry McDonald calmly took all of that and explained it, kept running with it. And at one point, he talked to Pat Buchanan about the Council on Foreign Relations, and Pat was kind of surprised that Ronald Reagan had put so many people from the CFR into his cabinet. Even though he wasn't himself a member, he put something like 200 or 300 people in the CFR and the State Department, essentially controlling it as it had been since Woodrow Wilson.
Well, there's something very fundamental about all of this. People think up ideas. People organize ideas. People finance ideas. People make things happen. And if things happen in politics, you know they were planned. Mm-hmm. If you have these plans and they're done behind closed doors or out of sight of the public,
like the TPP or the Trans-Pacific Partnership or these trade deals,
and if it's for evil, it's a conspiracy. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're talking about. Now, we do believe that there is an organized conspiracy at the top that manipulates all of these things. I'm putting the final touches on a book that I've been working on for 45 years on the first 100 years of this country, 1776 to 1876. And I show how that conspiracy worked in that time period. People don't know how much society and government has changed in America, and that how we have to get back to what they gave us originally. We have to unamend the Constitution rather than add amendments to it. We've got to get rid of the 16th and the 17th Amendments in order to have a balanced budget. It won't work otherwise. Mm-hmm. Things of that nature, that's a whole hour's talk, and, we could be here all day. But the thing is that it's the information that the people don't have that is the real killer. I watch a lot of Fox News because I scream at them less than the other channels. Because it's not so much what they say as much as what they do not say.
Yes.
And one of the things that never comes up in a neoconservative atmosphere or on Fox and that sort of thing is the first purpose of our government, which is to protect the independence of our country. Mm-hmm. You can't have a free country, you can't have a constitution like we have or anything else if the country isn't independent. And that's the problem with these things. They're taking away our independence. They're going to change the Constitution. They're trying to do it other ways at the same time. They've got a lot of different ways that they do these things, and they zig and zag, but they always have two main purposes, and they never take their eye off those purposes. And one is a world government, and the other is no religion other than the state. Mm-hmm. And if you look at everything through that prism, you will understand what they do. They may disagree with one another, and when you're playing this kind of power game, it's a very dangerous game. We always say that the problem we have with dealing with them is that we are dealing with criminals. We have to act morally and responsibly and ethically. The problem that they have, they work with criminals.
Well, and now the gloves are coming off. Now we're seeing in these trade agreements what has slipped out, that's mm-hmm. been leaked out by WikiLeaks and others. We see that it is now to the point where it is direct attack on our individual rights, as we're talking about our freedom of speech, freedom of press, direct attacks on the Internet. There's other aspects in it, but we also see our entire system of justice being turned over to essentially an arbitration sequence where the corporations, only the multinational corporations, though, would have equal footing to our sovereign countries.
Sure.
Of course, anybody that has a business that is entirely inside one particular country, they would have no legal standing in those types of agreements. It's only the multinational corporations that get protected in that type of environment.
When you read Marx and Engels, the Communist Manifesto and other writings, you'll see they very rarely talk about revolution per se. They always talk about overturning the old social order or a social revolution, etc., because a government is reflective of the society that put it together. Mm-hmm. And so they know that if they had a communist revolution, that society could have a counter-revolution and throw the rascals out. So they know they have to change society first. And so I have a whole list in here of all the various things that are being done to the society of the United States and our citizens through treaties with the United Nations and how they control these things. Fundamental rights, banking, trade, industry, education, women, birth control, all the way down to tourism.
Oh, yeah, and of course the family as well. They have the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child.
Absolutely.
And everything to essentially directly replace the family with the state.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's and everything will be the state. It's really interesting that way. One of the things that just to give you an idea of one of the problems with free trade that everybody can understand is what is the most what does every country in the world use as a monetary unit? It's called paper. Mm-hmm. That's what they all use. So if you have an agreement between one or more countries, they have a printing press for their paper. And if any of those get out of balance with speeding the press up, it throws the whole trade agreement out the window because the rate of exchange goes belly up. And so that's why they need a centralized currency to take it over, which is really dangerous. Then you have no control over your economy at all.
We're going to be right back with Arthur Thompson from the John Birch Society. He's CEO of the John Birch Society. We're going to talk about, in the next segment, let's talk about some solutions. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm joined here in studio with Arthur Thompson, CEO of the John Birch Society. He is on, I guess you're on a book tour with your new book, International Merger by Foreign Entanglements, and you have a meeting coming up tomorrow in Houston. Tell us about that, where people can find you at that meeting.
We're at the Christie Restaurant. Not sure what the address is, but at noon. It's $25 because of the meal, that sort of thing. But I'll be addressing at length what's in my book, International Merger, and talking about what they can also do about it.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I want to talk about that in this segment. What do we do as we see things accelerating? We see what we've been talking about for 20 years, you know, what Alex has been talking about, what you guys have been talking about for decades. We see this now being exposed. It's no longer being done in secret. It's being done openly. And so now the question is, what do we do about this now that it is getting so close to fruition?
Well, for one thing, people have to understand they have to be involved. If you think that you're going to stop this without being involved, you're very mistaken. One of the things that we say is that we need to educate the opinion molders in our community. We have to get close to the Boy Scout leader, the Kiwanian, the city councilman, our state representative, et cetera, and give them things to read. Mm-hmm. Give them DVDs on the Constitution and that sort of thing until they get to trust you and they start actually coming to you for information. As you get the opinion molders informed, things start to happen. The community starts to change. Now, everybody agrees that a third of the people during the War for Independence were for independence. A third were against, and a third could care less. But the key was that the people for independence were able to get to 60% of that 5% who run the community. In other words, it was only 3%. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If we can get to that 3% today, we will win. But we don't because we don't get involved enough. And we need to do it in a concerted manner so that we're all doing the same thing at the same time on the same subject, same solution, et cetera, and don't diffuse our forces. This is what we do in the John Birch Society. We organize local chapters to get out there and educate people, give them books, give them pamphlets, get them to subscribe to the magazine, come to speeches, watch DVDs, watch your program, that kind of thing.
And you do it in an organized way,
in an organized
focused way.
Yes. And so that's what really will save the day in the long run. And we've got places around the country where we've done this very well, and it's changed that state and that community. We're concentrating now in certain states. I won't mention which they are because we seem to have people that kind of get in there and try to muddy the waters when we broadcast these things. But we are organizing in areas to make a real difference in Congress. But again, most people don't want to get involved. They don't want to give up their time, their energy, or their money for whatever reason. And so you get just a few, and that's all it really takes. We know that we have 500 members in a congressional district. It's over. From dog catcher to Congress, they'll elect the most conservative constitutionalist on the ballot. It's the way it works. It takes a little time to season. I mean, you don't have 500 members and say we've won, because then those 500 members have to work in educating the community. But once they do that, that's the sort of thing that happens every time.
All right, we're still joined by Dave Macko. And Dave, I got to tell you, that last part was absolutely the best.
Well, I certainly agree. I was mentioning that I had the honor of meeting Robert Welch about half a dozen times. I also met Larry McDonald a few times, and I've met Art Thompson. I'm highly impressed by him also. Excuse me. You can always be sure when you hear any member of the John Birch Society make any statement about anything that they are being very, very careful, because they've been under attack. The society has been under attack now for almost 60 years. So the officer of the society is always very, very careful as to being factual. So almost anything you hear from an officer of the society or anyone writing for the New American, you can count on as being 100% accurate.
Right, exactly right. We actually have a chapter of the John Birch Society right here in our county. I've been invited to join many times. I've attended the meetings, and I have seen prominent politicians at the meetings. And, of course, I'm never going to mention who they are, but when I walk into a John Birch Society meeting and I see certain politicians in that room, I know who the constitutional people are. And so you can, if I say to you, this person is absolutely a constitutionalist, you can take that to the bank.
Well, I try to adhere to it, and I certainly would if I could be elected.
All right, so Robert Welch is the voice we heard at the beginning when David Knight was, when they laid out the plan for America in the beginning. I want to get into something. Real quick, though, on a side note, I always admit when I'm wrong. And last week, or Sunday rather, when I called out John Arthur Hutchison of the News Herald, I mentioned that a certain somebody was John Plechnik's opponent in the race for Willoughby Hills City Council, and I mentioned the wrong person. So I apologize, and I admit when I'm wrong. That's a rarity nowadays, Dave.
You mean being wrong or admitting it?
Admitting it.
I agree.
So I always apologize when I'm wrong. And interesting subject. And these gentlemen from that article, I don't know whether you had the privilege to read that article or not, but they had tried to bury candidate Kim Laurie.
Yeah, I did have a chance to read that. I was at the Lake County Fair last Saturday, and I visited her booth. Now, she appears to be a dedicated patriot and supporter of the Constitution, the kind of people we need.
You know what's great about her is she knows about this Agenda 21, and she's very much an opponent of it. That's what we need at the county level.
It needs to be attacked at all levels, just the same way they're infiltrating at levels. Congress can do its part by stopping. I'm sure there's some federal money involved in there, so just find it and defund it. And again,
right.
as I was stressing during the campaign, It does not take both houses of Congress or President. It merely takes 218 members of the House of Representatives to shut down any unconstitutional program that involves money, because all revenue measures are to be initiated in the House of Representatives.
Now, Dave, I'm sure this show is not big enough to have a Rosa Koire on the show, who is an expert on Agenda 21, who wrote the book Behind the Green Mask. But from your view, what can a county commissioner actually do to stop Agenda 21?
Well, they don't have to put new county taxes on the ballot. They just using the power of the office where they can out to the public more than the average citizen can help. It would depend, of course, on each particular county. Well, they don't have a county charter, and I don't recommend county charters, because here in Cuyahoga County we have one, and we don't even elect our sheriff anymore, which is very bad. So I don't recommend county charters, but if they have a county charter, I'm sure the county charter would show what their particular authority was in each area. So they can oppose tax. Most of these schemes involve tax money.
So Lake County has a $61 million budget, and in that budget somewhere has to be that would allocate funds towards Agenda 21, you think?
Well, the wonderful thing about being on the inside of any organization, whether county commission or a state school board or of course Congress or the state legislature, being on the inside, you're a lot better positioned to find out just what the shows are doing to rob us of our liberties, and even if you're the only one there who opposes it, you can still find out what's happening and alert the public much better. Sarah Fowler has done this very well as a member of the Ohio State School Board against Common Core or Obamacare.
Well, I tell you, Sarah Fowler is a diamond in the rough. I remember some of my very hardcore Republican friends. I took them out to dinner. We all went out to dinner together to Trevisano's restaurant, and they were doing a candidate night, and Sarah happened to be there, and I called her over to the table and asked her to explain to my friends everything that she was for or against. And what is that music? Are you hearing music, Dave?
No, I'm not. I'm hearing little rain.
I started hearing music
the roof.
out of nowhere.
No, I didn't hear it.
But Sarah Fowler convinced these two gentlemen, I mean, right away, instantaneously. And she's been a blessing to the residents of Ohio.
Yes, she is.
And she actually put out a post today that she was meeting her constituents in Columbus to argue the Common Core legislation.
Well, they're moving in the Ohio legislature to repeal it.
Right, and that's what we need to do.
Of course,
now,
but we need to be careful they don't replace it with something almost as bad.
Well, see, I don't like repeal and replace. I'm more of a just repeal guy.
Repeal and, same here. Same here. That's like going to your doctor and he tells you have cancer, and he says, okay, here's what we do to get rid of the cancer and replace it with Ebola.
Right.
That's the. And whenever I hear this repeal and replace propaganda, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. If you go to a doctor, you want to be cured. You don't want to be cured and have another disease.
Right, and that's where the Republicans are going wrong. They're talking about repeal and replace Obamacare. What are you going to replace it with? How about we don't replace it? How about we take down the boundaries between the states, allow the insurance companies to sell everywhere, and the prices will naturally come down.
Mm-hmm. Well, the federal
and everybody
government
will be able to afford it.
The federal government has no authority over the health of the American people unless you're in the armed forces, and even there you see how they've killed off so many veterans through the day.
You know, it's funny, Dave. They have the power to regulate commerce, but in the healthcare instance, they don't choose to regulate it. They choose to isolate it. All right. Moving on. I want to talk about unions. I happen to be a member of a union, and I think it's a pretty good union. However, I received a pamphlet in the mail from my union, and some of the stuff that I saw on there just made me sick to my stomach. They talked about social justice, equal justice, blah, blah, blah justice, this, that, and the other thing justice. All of the socialist talking points. It's a very good union. They don't ask for any more than they deserve. In fact, you know, not too many years ago, minimum wage was 5 silver quarters. And if you look at the melt value on those 5 silver quarters right now, it's about $26. So minimum wage should actually be today about $26 an hour. However, in the state of Ohio, if you were to overnight raise the minimum wage to $26 an hour, do you know how many companies would up and leave the state, Dave? We lost Dave. We'll wait for him to call back in. Like I said, we're under attack, so anything can happen tonight. All right. If we changed the minimum wage to $26 an hour today, half the companies in Ohio would get up and leave. They're not being fair. They're not keeping up with inflation. They will happily, and right now some of you are saying, I thought this guy was a Republican. He certainly doesn't sound like a Republican. Listen, I'm a realist. I'm a man for the people because I am the people. Republican Party has historically always been for business. And I'm going to tell you a little story about businesses. And don't get me wrong, there are bad unions out there, like the teachers union, the police union. The teachers union will defend perverts. The police union will defend murderers. My union defends the people. However, they are misguided because they post stuff like, you know, social justice, stuff like that, which we know is all BS. It's the socialist talking points. And this is why the Republican Party needs to invest in the unions. I don't know why they haven't done it already. There are good unions. My union happens to be one of them. I'm not going to disclose it. I'm simply going to give you a brief history on unions. And, of course, we're going to bring Dave back on here in a minute. All right. Here's the song. You all know it pretty well. But we're going to tell you what it's about. Only see if I can find it. Like I say, everything is just scattered today.
People say a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood. Muscle and blood and skin and bones. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load the 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
Allow me to educate you. Until the late 1950s, when changes in federal and state laws, along with changing economic realities, doomed the practice, many companies issued tokens or scrip for use by their employees in company-run stores. This was especially widespread in the coal fields of Appalachia, where I'm from, where many miners also lived in company-owned towns. We mentioned before on the show, people like Rockefeller were millionaires back when people didn't even know what millionaires were. I watched an episode of Little House on the Prairie where they depicted such a scene where the regulators came into town and he told the townspeople, look, we're taking over this town. And the townspeople were like, no, you're not. And they said, oh, yes, we are. Well, the townspeople said, well, it's not going to be worth anything. They burned down the whole town. In some cases, they would lock people up in the church and burn it down. These companies, these millionaires, had the capacity to hire the regulators to then go out and kill everyone in the town and take it over. Now, I'm not saying the coal companies did that, but they owned whole towns. In these company towns or coal camps, the only store in town was usually owned or run on behalf of the coal company. In theory, scrip was an advance against unearned wages and usable by only the employee to whom it was issued. In practice, many miners were never able to fully retire their debt to company store, and scrip became the unofficial currency of the community, even being placed in the collection plates at some coal town churches. Scrip in the very beginning was more a trade credit or demand deposit at the single local general store. Ledger credit scrip, however, gave way to scrip coupon books, which eliminated the tedious bookkeeping chores involved in over-the-counter credit, transactions that must be followed by ledger entries. The institutions that supplied coupon scrip were companies already in business, printing tickets, tokens, and metal tags for various other kinds of enterprises. They were advertised extensively in mining catalogs during the first half of the 20th century, touting the advantages of their own scrip systems. That's a little bit of history, but here is history you probably never heard. The Battle of Blair Mountain. Now, I was asked to join the union committee in my union. And I always joke, I say, if I ever run for office, the Democrat Party will never be able to peg me for anything because I don't give a damn what you do in your bedroom. I have a gay daughter. I belong to a union, and I'm going to serve on the committee. I mean, what else are you going to come after me for? All right. The Battle of Blair Mountain was one of the largest civil uprisings in the United States history and the largest armed rebellion since the American Civil War. For 5 days in late August and early September 1921, in Logan County, West Virginia, some 10,000 armed coal miners confronted 3,000 lawmen and strikebreakers called the Logan Defenders, who were backed by coal mine operators during an attempt by the miners to unionize the southwestern West Virginia coal fields. The battle ended after approximately 1 million rounds were fired, and the United States Army intervened by presidential order. So here's a little background. The Battle of Blair Mountain was the result of economic exploitation of workers during a period of social transformation in the southern West Virginia coal fields. Beginning in 1870 to 1880, coal operators had established the company town system. Coal operators paid private detectives as well as public law enforcement agents to ensure that union organizers were kept out of the region. In order to accomplish this objective, agents of the coal operators used intimidation, harassment, espionage, and even murder. Throughout the early the early 20th century, West Virginia coal miners attempted to overthrow this system and engaged in a series of strikes, including the Paint Creek Cabin Strike of 1912, which coal operators attempted to stop through violent means. Mining families, under the terror of Baldwin Felts detective agents, who were professional strikebreakers, under the hire of coal operators. Now, these are the corporations back then. So the corporations hired the law enforcement officials to break down the workers and their families. During that dispute, agents drove a heavily armored train through the tent colony at night, opening fire on women, men, and children with a machine gun. They would repeat this type of tactic during the Ludlow Massacre in Colorado the next year, with even more disastrous results. By 1920, the United Mine Workers of America, or the UMWA, organized most of West Virginia. The southern coal fields, however, remained non-unionized bastions of coal operator power. In early 1920, the UMW President John L. Lewis targeted Mingo County for organization. Certain aspects of Mingo made it more attractive to Union leaders than neighboring Logan County, which was under control of the vehemently anti-Union Sheriff Don Chafin and his deputized army. Remember, we talked about the sheriff and his power to deputize the whole county. Mingo's political structure was more independent, and some politicians were pro-union. Cable Tasterman, the mayor of the independent town of Mattawan, was one supporter of the Union cause. He appointed 27-year-old Sid Hatfield as town police chief. As a teenager, Hatfield had worked in the coal mines, and he was sympathetic to the miners' condition. He was also a member of the famous Hatfield family of the Hatfield and McCoy feud. These men provided Union organizers an opportunity to gain a foothold, and unionizing accelerated rapidly in the county. In response to organizing efforts, coal operators used every means to block the Union. One of their primary tactics of combating the Union was firing Union sympathizers, blacklisting them, and evicting them from their homes. Now remember, back then, the corporation, the coal operator, owned the store. They owned all the homes, so they could evict the workers from their homes. Their legal argument for evictions is best stated by S.B. Avis, a coal company lawyer. Quote, "It is like a servant lives at your house. if the servant leaves your employment, if you discharge him, you ask him to get out of the servant's quarters. It is a question of master and servant. The UMW set up tent colonies for the homeless miners' families, and soon a mass of idle, angry miners was concentrated in a small area along the Tug Fork River. Even with the coal operator suppression, by early May, 3,000 out of the 4,000 Mingo miners had joined the Union. At the Stone Mountain Coal Company near Mattawan, every single worker unionized and was subsequently fired and evicted. On May 19, 1920, 12 Baldwin Felts agents arrived in Mattawan, including Lee Felts, and promptly met up with Albert Felts, who was already in the area. Albert and Lee were the brothers of Thomas Felts, the founder and director of the agency. Albert had already been in the area and had tried to bribe Mayor Testerman with $500 to place machine guns on the roofs in the town, which Testerman refused. That afternoon, Albert and Lee, along with 11 other men, set out to Stone Mountain Coal Company property. The first family they evicted was a woman and her children, whose husband was not home at the time. They forced them out at gunpoint and threw their belongings into the road under a light. But steady rain came down all day. The miners who saw it were furious and sent word to town. As the agents walked to the train station to leave town, Sid Hatfield and a group of deputized miners confronted them and told the agents they were under arrest. Albert Felts replied that in fact he had a warrant for Sid's arrest. Testerman was alerted, and he ran into the street after a miner shouted that Sid had been arrested. Hatfield backed into the store, and Testerman asked to see the warrant. After reviewing it, the mayor exclaimed, "This is a bogus warrant." With these words, a gunfight erupted, and Sid Hatfield shot Albert Felts. Mayor Testerman fell to the ground in the first volley, mortally wounded. In the end, 10 men were killed, including Albert and Lee Felts. This gunfight became known as the Mattawan Massacre, and its symbolic significance was enormous for the miners. The seemingly invincible Baldwin Felts had been beaten by the miners' own hero, Sid Hatfield. Sid became an immediate legend and a hero to Union miners, and became the symbol hope that the oppression of the coal operators and their hired guns could be overthrown. Throughout the summer and into that fall of 1920, the Union gained strength in Mingo County, as did the resistance of the coal operators. Low-intensity warfare was waged up and down the Tug River. In late June, state police, under the command of Captain Brockus, raided the Lick Creek tent colony near Williamson, West Virginia. Miners were said to have fired on Brockus and Martin's men from the colony, and in response, the state police shot and arrested miners, ripped the canvas tents to shreds, and scattered the miner families' belongings. Both sides were bolstering their arms, and Sid Hatfield continued to be a problem, especially when he converted Testerman's jewelry store into a gun shop. On January 26, 1921, the trial of Sid Hatfield for killing Albert Felts began. This trial in the national spotlight, and it brought much attention to the coal miners' cause. Hatfield's stature and mythical status grew as the trial proceeded. Sid Hatfield posted and talked to reporters, fanning the flames of his own stature and legend. All men acquitted in the end, but overall the Union was facing significant setbacks. In the midst of this tense situation, Sid Hatfield traveled to McDowell County on August 1st, 1921, to stand trial for charges of dynamiting a coal triple. Along with him traveled a good friend, Ed Chambers, and their two wives. As they walked up the courthouse stairs, unarmed, flanked by their wives, a group of Baldwin-Felts agents standing at the top of the stairs opened fire. Hatfield was killed instantly, while Chambers' bullet-riddled body rolled to the bottom of the stairs. Over Sally Chambers' protestation, one of the agents ran down the stairs and shot Chambers once more in the back of the head, point blank. As Sid and Ed's bodies were returned to Mattawan, word of the slayings spread through the mountains. The miners believed that Hatfield was slain in cold blood, and it soon appeared that the assassins would escape punishment. Hatfield's death enraged miners, and they began to pour out of the mountains to take up arms. Miners along the Little Coal River were among the first to militarize and began actions such as patrolling and guarding the area. Sheriff Don Chafin sent Logan County troopers to Little Coal River area. With the end result, the troopers were apprehended, disarmed, and sent fleeing by the miners. On August 7th, 1921, the leaders of the UMW District 17, which encompasses most of the southern West Virginia, called a rally at the state capitol in Charleston. These leaders were Frank Keeney and Fred Mooney, who were veterans of previous mine conflicts in the region. Both were local and were well read and articulate. At a rally on August 7th, Mary Harris, Mother Jones, called on the miners not to march into Logan and Mingo counties and set up by the Union by force. Accused by some of losing her nerve, she rightly feared a bloodbath in a battle between lightly armed Union forces and the more heavily armed deputies from Logan County. Yet, feeling they had been lied to again by West Virginia's Governor Morgan, armed men began gathering at Lenz Creek Mountain, near Marmot and Kanawha County, on August 20th, where 4 days later, up to 13,000 had gathered and began marching towards Logan County. Impatient to get to the fighting, miners near St. Albans in West Virginia's Kanawha County commandeered a Chesapeake and Ohio freight train, renamed by the miners as the Blue Steel Special, to meet up with the advance column of marchers at Danville in Boone County on their way to Bloody Mingo. During this time, Keeney and Mooney fled to Ohio, while the fiery leader, Bill Blizzard, assumed quasi-leadership of the miners. The first skirmishes occurred on the morning of August 25th. The bulk of the miners were still 15 miles away. The following day, President Warren Harding threatened to send in federal troops and Army Martin MB-1 bombers. After a long meeting in the town of Madison, the seat of Boone County, agreements were made convincing the miners to return home. However, the struggle was far from over. After spending days to assemble his private army, Chafin was not going to be denied his battle to end Union attempts at organizing Logan County coal mines. And it goes on and on and on. And there was a battle. And following the battle, 985 miners were indicted for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to murder, and treason against the state of West Virginia. Though some were acquitted by sympathetic juries, many were also imprisoned for a number of years, though they were paroled in 1925. It would be Bill Blizzard's trial, where the unexploded bomb was used as evidence of the government and company's brutality and ultimately resulted in his acquittal. In the short term, the battle was an overwhelming victory for management. UMW membership plummeted more than 50,000 miners to approximately 10,000 over the next several years. And it was not until 1935, following the Great Depression and the beginning of the New Deal under President Franklin Roosevelt, that the UMW fully organized in southern West Virginia. So there's a little history on the unions, and it was a little bit poorly punctuated. I had a little trouble reading that. But you get an understanding of the conditions that people were in. These camps were dirty, nasty. The corporations had police forces. It was a bad scene. And the unions came in. They built good schools. They built things in the community that, gave people something to do. They gave them hope. And I'm going to get Dave on to talk a little bit about that.
As a general rule, as if we were living in a free country with free enterprise, the working conditions naturally increase. For example, at the beginning of the 20th century, Henry Ford raised the wages of his workers, I believe, to $5 a day, without any compulsion either by the unions or by the government. He merely wanted to get better workers, more productive workers who would do a better job. Now, obviously, if management thugs can come into a town and shoot people, there's obvious collusion there with the state government, and that certainly should have been resolved some way. As to getting the FedGov involved in anything, we've seen where that leads to for the last 100 years, or even the last 150 years if you count the Civil War. You mentioned at one point that the federal troops came in, I believe you said in the year 1920, when Wilson was still president. Were those troops called in by the legislature? If not, it was unconstitutional to use them.
I believe it was a threat. However, in other stories, not the one that I chose to read, other stories depicted that the National Guard did come in, and that would have been authorized by the governor.
Okay. Yeah, the governor can authorize it if the state legislature isn't in session. The answer to this sort of thing is more prosperity, which always comes through free enterprise, not through government control or through establishment of monopolies, which are almost always controlled or caused by governments.
Well, I think the reason that people, and we had an argument today about manufacturing in Ohio, and it was brought up that 1 in 10 citizens of Ohio are in the manufacturing profession. And it was said that they made an average of $54,000 a year, which I thought was rather high. And a couple of people commented that they worked in manufacturing and they didn't make much money, and they said that the unions made a lot more money, which is true. Now, I mentioned that, years back that people made 5 silver quarters was minimum wage, and that the melt value today was $26 an hour on those 5
That's
silver
correct.
quarters.
That is correct.
So we have not compensated workers for the inflation.
Well, of course, again, the inflation is caused by the government. I talked about the minimum wage when I was at the Lake County Liberty News Herald interview last week, which is going to be on TV mid-September. My Democrat opponent praised and glorified the concept of minimum wage. I tried to explain that it is totally contrary to the rules of economics, because it's going to put people out of work if an employer is not able to pay his employees but the minimum wages. And if it is such a great idea at $10 an hour, why not make it $20 an hour, or $30, or $50, or even $100? And it shows how ridiculous the whole concept of a government-mandated minimum wage is, and it hurts lower-income people, and especially young people who are coming into the job market for the first time. And in many cases, with young people coming into the job market, just the fact of getting training, the idea of getting up a certain time every day to go to work is important training for them, something they never had in the government schools. So minimum wage is a horrible idea. It is not beneficial. It's one of those issues where you have unintended consequences, and they're all bad.
Right, and that's unfortunate that the companies that want all this money given to them by government refuse to pay their employees a decent wage. And we'll get into that on Sunday, Dave.
Okay.
Any last comments? We got about 30 seconds.
Well, again, I invite everyone to the Andover Tea Party at 1 p.m. in beautiful downtown Andover on Saturday, September 13th, where I will be speaking at the annual rally. The incumbent in the 14th district has been invited. He does not plan to attend, at least that's what we think so far. The Democrat opponent has not been invited and probably wouldn't come anyway.
All right, Dave. Hopefully we'll see you on Sunday. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, God bless you all. God bless America.